Before we move on to steam traps, let us first try to understand why we require steam traps. Steam lines in general run over large distances. Because of this large exposed area, there is always a heat loss from steam due to radiation. And because of this heat loss, some amount of steam is converted into condensate. This condensate formed in the pipelines is very dangerous because it can cause water hammer, resulting in vibrations and even failure of the pipeline. Further, it reduces the efficiency of heat transfer of the process for which the steam is being used. Third, it can cause corrosion and damage the pipeline itself. Steam traps are continuous drainage, intermittent discharge devices that are used to remove steam condensate, air, and non-condensable gases from steam lines. The point to be noted is that these are continuous drainage devices, but the discharge is intermittent. Now coming to the classification of steam traps. These are either temperature operated or density operated. The density operated steam traps are also called mechanical steam traps. They work on the principle of density difference between the steam and the condensate. They come in two types, ball float type and the inverted bucket type. In ball float type, it is the upward and downward motion of the ball that closes or opens the port for discharge of steam condensate. While in the inverted bucket type, it is the upward or downward motion of this bucket that opens or closes the port for condensate discharge. In temperature-operated steam traps, the thermodynamic steam traps works on Bernoulli's principle, while the thermostatic steam trap works on the principle of thermal expansion. The expansion or contraction of the bellow opens or closes the port for discharge of steam condensate. We will get into the details of each type of steam trap, but before that, we should look at the factors to be considered while choosing a steam trap. So the first factor is heat loss due to radiation. The larger the size of the steam trap, the larger will be the exposed area. Consequently, larger amount of heat will be lost due to radiation. Because of that, the bucket type steam traps are somewhere inferior to the thermodynamic steam traps because of the larger area of bucket type steam traps. Foreign particles or the ability to accommodate dust particles. The number of moving parts. Similarly, the number of moving parts in the thermodynamic steam traps is quite less as compared to the float type or the inverted bucket type steam traps. The loss of live sea is also a major concern while choosing the steam traps. This is ball float type steam trap. This is the steam inlet port through which the steam enters the steam trap. This is the condensate discharge port through which the steam condensate exits the steam trap. This is the float, and this is the mechanism which opens or closes the steam condensate discharge port. Initially, when there is no steam entering or no condensate exiting, the float is at its lowermost position, and this mechanism closes the steam condensate discharge port. Now when the steam enters the steam trap through this port, it is in its vapor phase. Gradually, after losing some amount of heat, it begins to condense. When more and more steam gets condensed, the level of steam condensate goes on increasing. This lifts the float from its lowermost position, and gradually the mechanism gets activated and opens the steam condensate discharge port. When this port is open, the steam condensate begins to move out of the steam trap. Now as the steam condensate begins to move out of the steam trap, the level of steam condensate goes on decreasing. As it begins to decrease, the float also starts moving back to its original position, and the mechanism also gets activated and it gradually closes the steam condensate discharge port. So in this way, it discharges the steam, but the steam condensate, it discharges the steam condensate, but prevents the steam from leaving the steam trap. Inverted bucket type steam trap. This is the steam inlet port. This is the inverted bucket. This is the condensate outlet port. So this, the condensate, non-condensable gases or air exits the steam trap. This is a mechanism that opens or closes this port. Now initially, when the entire body of steam trap and the bucket is filled with steam condensate, the bucket will be submerged. Now in this position, this port will be opened. So as more and more steam enters and gets condensed, the condensate will flow through this port. Now when we have steam in majority inside this bucket or this steam trap, this bucket will become buoyant and move upwards, and this mechanism will close this port. So the flow of condensate outwards will be stopped. So this is an example of inverted bucket type steam trap. This is an inverted bucket type steam trap. You can see the condensate is being discharged over here. Now a thermodynamic steam trap. Now initially this is the inlet, this is a strainer. Through this inlet orifice it moves to the disc, and this is the outlet orifice and this is the outlet port. So the steam condensate enters from this port, travels through this orifice and again exits through this port. Now let us consider the steam condensate enters through this port, passing through the strainer, it enters the inlet orifice. When there is sufficient condensate, it exerts some pressure on the disc and lifts it out. When this disc is lifted, the condensate from this inlet orifice moves to the outer orifice and then exits through the outlet port. When all the condensate is discharged through the outlet port, then the steam will begin to pass through this inlet orifice to outlet orifice and will try to exit from this outlet port. But the speed of steam is far more than the condensate. So going by the Bernoulli's principle, whenever there is increase in velocity, there will be a sudden drop in pressure. And because of the difference in pressure, this disc again moves back to its original position, thus closing the port, closing the connection between the inlet and the outlet orifice. So it prevents the steam from escaping the steam trap and only allows the condensate to move from inlet orifice to the outlet orifice. This is a thermodynamic steam trap, and this one is also a thermodynamic steam trap. Thermostatic steam trap. It is the simplest of all. In this type of steam trap, we have an inlet port for steam and exit port for steam condensate. It works on the principle of temperature difference between the steam and the condensate. So when there is a condensate entering from this port, the temperature of the condensate is quite less than the steam itself. So when condensate enters, this bellow will contract and this port opens and the condensate begins to flow. As the entire amount of condensate gets discharged and steam enters through this port, because of the high temperature of steam, this bellow expands and closes the port, thus preventing the leakage of steam and allowing only the condensate to discharge through the port. So this is a thermostatic steam trap.